Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amy Sam. I am the Health Education Project Specialist at the Maxwell and Eleanor Blum Patient Family Learning Center at Mass General. Today's program is part of our Spiritual Care series, a special collaboration between the Blum Center and Mass General Spiritual Care Department. Before we get started, I just want to go a few items with you all. Please note that today's session will be recorded for educational purposes. If you're interested in viewing the recording, it'll be made available on the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Please note that you're in listen-only mode. Everyone has mute so we can hear our speaker today. If you have any questions for our guest speaker or any thoughts you'd like to share, feel free to do so in the chat feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen. We'll have time for them throughout the session. Only Blum Center staff and our guest speaker will see your questions and comments. Please do not share any personal medical information or questions in the chat. If you have a personal medical question, please ask your doctor. Lastly, at the end of today's session, you'll be directed to a brief survey, which we'd like to ask you to help us complete. Your feedback is important to us as we plan future programs. Okay, so joining us today, we have Reverend Erica Rose Long. Reverend Long is a senior staff chaplain and clinical specialist of spiritual care at the Mass General Hospital. She specializes in spiritual care for patients with psychiatric illness and neurological conditions. She is also an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister affiliated with Arlington Street Church in Boston, Mass. In recognition of Mental Wellness Month, she joins us today to lead a session on spirituality and mental health. So please join me in welcoming Reverend Long.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you all here today. I'm just going to set up my slides for us. All right. So as Amy said, we're talking about spirituality and mental health today. To get us started, I just wanted to acknowledge that this is a very vulnerable topic. So talking about our spirituality and talking about our mental health can be things that feel very personal, and both can have stigma around them. So I want to thank you for being here for yourself and for each other. And to just ground us into our time together today, I thought we could just take 3 deep breaths. All right, so join me as you are comfortable and willing. Let's take a breath in and out. Breath in and out. Breathing in and out. For today's presentation, I invite you to take breaths whenever you need to move as you need to. None of us can see you, so whatever you need to do to feel comfortable, go for it. I also encourage you, if you would like, to maybe have a journal or some writing materials, not just to take notes, but to keep track of what you're feeling, what comes up for you as we move through today's session. There will also be invitations to participate in the conversation through the chat. So I will prompt you at those moments to add things to the chat, but also, as Amy said, if at any point throughout the presentation you have something that you would like to share or you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll do my very best to address it and to answer it. I developed this presentation for people who are struggling with their mental health and also people who are caring for someone who is struggling with their mental health. I also believe that we all fall into one of these categories at some point in our life. And many of us are in both of these categories at different points in our lives, as either someone who has a mental health condition or is caring for someone who does. So this is a little bit about me. You already heard my bio from Amy, so you know you know that I'm a chaplain. I'm an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister. These are some images from my years in ministry. I've been here at Mass General for about 8 years, a little over 8 years, and I one of my primary assignments where I work is on our inpatient psychiatric unit. And there I collaborate with our psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, occupational therapists, and psychiatric nurses to provide care to people who are in the hospital because they're experiencing a mental health crisis. I provide counseling one-on-one, spiritual counseling one-on-one with our patients, and I also coordinate a spirituality group that meets 4 times a week for our patients. What I'm sharing with you today, this presentation, is based on research and learning that I have gathered over my years in this work, but also from personal experiences and from stories and what I've observed and experienced alongside my patients. All right, so right off the bat, I think it's important for us to start out with some common ground, excuse me, on some definitions. So spirituality, this first definition here is from the Journal of Palliative Medicine, and it's the one that we use the most in our department. It's kind of long, so I'll let you read that on your own if you would like to. And the one on the bottom is one that I just learned recently that's based on the Joint Commission, and it says, our inner belief system, spirituality is our inner belief system. It helps individuals search for the meaning and purpose of life. It helps them experience hope, love, inner peace, comfort, and support. And religion is a type of codified spirituality in which all followers practice the same faith and the same deity. Religions have specific ceremonies and rituals, meeting places, and congregations. So that's a definition from McLean Hospital. We've also got this one below that's from Spirituality and Palliative Care. That says that each religion offers a unique framework for guiding affiliated individuals. In some religions, it is simply enough to believe in God, while in others, religions place a greater emphasis on practice. Some religions focus more on the individual, others emphasize the community. Regardless of the structure, the ultimate goal of religion is to provide followers with concrete ways of expressing their spirituality. So based on these two definitions, I'd like to sort of share this analogy that I've come up with, that religion is to spirituality as a square is to a rectangle. So religion is a common form of spirituality, but it is not the only form. All right, and mental health. In the same way that we have physical health, we have mental health. Throughout our lives, our mental health shifts and changes. Some people struggle with chronic mental illnesses like depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, or schizophrenia. And others experience a change in their mental health as a result of life experiences like the death of a loved one, the ending of a relationship, a stressful job, or simply just changes in life that occur with aging. All of us at one point or another will struggle with our mental health and support someone we love as they struggle with theirs. So I like this broader definition of our mental health, that yes, there are these chronic conditions, but there is also this spectrum of our mental health throughout our life that is impacted by our experiences and by our losses. There's a strong connection between mental health and spirituality. However, historically, the fields of psychology and psychiatry have not always viewed spirituality as a positive form of coping and thriving. Famous psychologists like Freud pathologized religion as a mental health problem, arguing that religious practices and beliefs were signs of mental weakness. Not only do we now understand that this stance is culturally insensitive and demeaning, we also see how religion and spirituality help patients recover from trauma, find valuable social support, and cope with the existential distress of a chronic mental illness. There are programs like the Danielson Institute at Boston University, which now specialize in integrating spirituality, religion, and existential issues into the training of therapists so that they can better understand and support their clients. The quotes on this slide are from recent research on the beneficial impacts of spirituality. They note that spirituality can be good for the mind and the body, that it can help with coping with cancer or clinical depression. It helps increase acceptance, decreases negative emotions, helps us find meaning and deepen our relationships with others. Spirituality can also help address issues such as poor self-esteem, low self-confidence, lack of self-control, fear of daily tasks or challenges. For this reason, it can be a helpful extension to our treatment plans, to how we care for one another and for ourselves, and how to keep ourselves mentally strong. All right, just want to check something. All right, so I realize that I can't see the chat when I have the screen up, so I'm just going to click out of it when I need to make sure I'm not missing anything from you all. Thank you for journeying with me through my Zoom presentation. All right, so next. I think just as it's important to talk about how spirituality can benefit our mental health, there are times when our spirituality can impact our mental health in a bad way, or can be a part of the symptoms we're experiencing related to our mental illness. So if at any point you notice in yourself that your spirituality is harming you, and I would define that as it's diminishing your sense of self-worth, it's causing you to feel extreme distress, or you have difficulty thinking about anything except your spirituality, please seek support from a mental health provider. And I have a couple other examples here of some things that could come up that could be warning signs that you might need support in addressing how your spirituality is impacting your mental health. So extreme feelings of guilt or shame, obsessive thoughts, excessive spending. I've met folks who are struggling with their spirituality, where it causes them to want to give all their money away, all their possessions away. While that could be normative for some spiritual traditions, it can also have a big impact on your life. And so those are things that you would want to be in conversation with someone else about, preferably a therapist or someone you trust in your life. So again, if any of these things are coming up for you, please seek support. In our department, we often use this Venn diagram to talk about spiritual distress and spiritual loneliness, which are something that many of us struggle with at different points in our life. So you'll see here, we've got these 3 circles with different types of disconnection, and all of these combined together can lead to spiritual distress. So disconnection from other people and a disconnection from the self can be symptoms of a mental health change or illness. Because of the stigma around mental health conditions, many people isolate when they're feeling unwell. Similarly, when we don't feel well, it's harder to engage in the activities that give our lives meaning. Disconnection from the sacred can be caused by a mental health issue, though it is one of the more difficult types of disconnection to discuss with a provider because of the stigma that we discussed earlier. Disconnection from the sacred is what we call it in this model, but it also could be known as existential distress. I like to think of it as the big angry why. So whenever you have this big feeling inside of, why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to someone I love? That is existential distress. That is a feeling of disconnection from meaning and from something greater than ourselves. These 3 dimensions of spiritual disconnection compound on one another in ways that make it difficult to resolve one without working on the others as well. For example, in order to understand and love ourselves, we often need support from people we trust. We also need a connection to something greater than ourselves, to the sacred, to guide us through uncertain times. I recently met with a woman who was struggling with depression. She shared that because of her depression symptoms, she no longer enjoyed activities she used to love, like walking her dog or spending time with her children. She was also grieving the death of her husband. This was sort of the pivotal moment in her life where she began to experience more acute depression through this loss. She was feeling so lonely, and she was questioning who she was now that her life had changed so much. Throughout her marriage and her life, she did feel connected to God. She attended church and had an active prayer practice. She also loved to walk in nature, and that was a way that she felt close to God. But now she feels nothing and has no interest in prayer. She feels like when she does pray, it's to no one, that there's no one listening. I met with this woman over the course of her admission, normalizing her feelings and helping her to find ways to feel connected again. Through our conversations and after the benefit of psychiatric treatment, she was able to identify her relationships with her children, telling stories about the past, and volunteering in her community as ways that she could feel connected again. Even though she still had that big angry why, like, why did my husband die? Why am I alone? She felt a little less distressed and a little more connected through the work that she did to better understand herself, to be in relationship with her care providers, including myself, and to find a sense of purpose again. So I also want to acknowledge that there are challenges to doing this spiritual work. And one of those major challenges is that many people in our society experience religious exclusion or trauma. So I often think of members of the LGBTQ community who are often cast out, not fully accepted. I see that often as a form of trauma, which would make it very difficult to connect to that part of yourself again, to trust a spiritual community, to trust your sense of self. I think sometimes lack of support, like maybe you're interested in spirituality, but nobody in your family is, or they think they might make fun of you, or some of those things do happen, which can be really hard. For others, it might feel inauthentic. I talk to folks who are trying to start a new spiritual practice as a way to work towards their recovery, especially folks struggling with addiction. There's a big emphasis on practicing prayer or mindfulness. And I've met people who are just like, it's not me. Like, it doesn't feel, I feel hokey, I feel weird. It doesn't feel like who I am. And in those cases, I think I like to validate them and to find something that could work, something that would feel more authentic. There's also often a cost, right? So later we'll get to some more resources, but if you are a part of a spiritual community, they often ask for funding, they ask for money, and that is not a requirement. It is, in most cases, it is a request that you give back to the community, but it can feel bad if you see everybody else giving and you're not able to give. And I'll just take a minute to stop sharing. Let's see, just checking the chat. Is there anything else that you all can think of that would be a barrier to time? Yes, thank you. Time is a great example. It takes like, I'll say, even for myself in my spiritual practices, finding the time to do something, it can be really hard. Anything else that could be a challenge in developing your spiritual life or finding spiritual connection that you all want to share? Okay. We can keep thinking about that too. All right, so because of some of these barriers, I wanted to offer us 3 spiritual exercises today, very quick, very easy, free, that we could do together to notice how our spirituality could be a tool for benefiting our mental health. So I invite you, this is the place where you can journal if you want to, and I'm also going to have some opportunities for you to share in the chat. All right. So, right off the bat, let's take a moment to reflect on what you value. What is important to you? What characteristics do you admire in yourself and others? I think of this as being a part of our core spirituality because our values are our guiding lights to seeking meaning and purpose in our life. So, if you don't mind, I would love for you to share a few things that you value. It could be something that you see on the slide. It could be something else that you think about. But what are three things that are really important to you in your life? You've got family time, kindness, health, compassion. I think if I were picking one for myself today, um, let's see, what's standing out to me today? Courage is standing out to me. We've also got someone sharing that a sense of community and belonging is a value. Someone else shared being able to think clearly. Another participant shared connection, humility, respect, and resilience. Excellent. And I'll just invite you to, like, when you think about what you value, when you name that word, whether you're writing it in your journal, putting it in the chat, or just holding it in your heart, how does it make you feel? What is your relationship to that value right now? One of the things that I've learned about how my values can be a helpful spiritual tool for me is that, oh, someone shared, they give me hope and strength. I love that. Something I've learned about how my naming my values can be a spiritual tool is sometimes I notice that I haven't been paying attention to one of them as much as I would like to. Sometimes I notice that I feel sadness around that, or I might notice, say, I value fairness, and I've noticed that today I've been really irritable. Maybe I feel irritable because I value fairness and I feel like I'm witnessing something that's unfair. So our values can be this amazing touchstone to understanding our emotions and to also inspiring our actions, right? Okay. Let's try another exercise. All right, so in spiritual care, when we refer to the sacred, the divine, or simply something greater than ourselves, that's something greater. It can be God, it can be the universe, or our legacy as humans. It can really be a lot of things. And when we are experiencing that connection to something greater than ourselves, we often feel a sense of wonder, a sense of awe, that sense of connection, maybe even a sense of purpose, a sense of being. I think of it lately, I was thinking about earlier today, it's like this sense of being alive. I have some photos here that I've shared as examples of places where you might feel that way. So, being in nature is a very common one for folks. Being at a concert, sort of having like a group experience, can be another example. Spending time with children, praying in community, or appreciating art. These are all examples of places where we can have this feeling of connection, where we feel that we are a part of a greater story than just simply our own. And even just remembering where you felt this, like having a memory of, oh, I felt this when I was on a mountaintop in Vermont, or I felt this when I was at this concert, it can help reawaken those feelings of awe and wonder and gratitude. Sometimes when we're struggling with our mental health, it's hard to feel those emotions. And just putting yourself in proximity to that place, getting as close as you can to where you felt that feeling before, can be a helpful tool. I had a woman I was working with at one point who told me that she felt closer to the sacred when she was in nature. And so every day she would just go outside barefoot and step on the grass when she was struggling with her depression. That's what she would do. She would just go outside and put her bare feet in the grass and feel a connection to the earth. And she described how the first couple times she did it, she didn't really feel that sense of awe and wonder, but as she did it each day, it grew. So I'm curious if you all would be willing to share in the chat, where is a place where you feel connected to something greater than yourself? Or when have you felt that? At the ocean, someone shared. I often feel that way too. Yeah, another person said by the ocean, it's so big. I think there is something sometimes about being near something vast, like the ocean or the night sky, where it's interesting how when we feel small, we feel this sense of connection to something bigger. A sunset, someone shared, looking at a sunset. That's great. Someone shared backpacking on a trail. Yeah. Someone else shared a sunrise on a hike. So nature is really a big one. And I don't know where you all are, but I live in Boston and sometimes it's hard to get in proximity to nature, but remembering those moments and trying to get ourselves out there when we can make a huge difference. I know for me, even just looking at the Charles River can, like watching the sunset over the Charles from my office is a way that I can feel that connection too. And these are, again, I mean, going to some of these places could cost money, right? Like you might have to pay to have transportation to one of these places, but a lot of them are free, right? Like looking at the sunset is free, looking at the moon is free, and those are ways we can connect to this part of ourselves without having to spend money. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time. All right, one more exercise for us today. Okay, so here's a list of some spiritual practices that you may have heard of, and some also may be new to you. As we grow and change in our life, we often need to change our spiritual practices. I'll just share from my own experience. Prior to the COVID pandemic, I prayed every day. I had this set of beads that I had created at a spiritual retreat, and every night I would pray with my beads. And I did that for 5 years. And then when COVID started, I felt more restless. I felt this, I guess part of it might have been some anxiety, but I think a lot of it was this like spiritual restlessness, this like what is happening? Things feel out of my control. And in order to feel more cared for by my spiritual practice, I needed to move. So I started doing yoga and praying at the same time. And being able to do those two things together, it helps me to feel more supported, more grounded in my practice. So here I've got my working definition of what a spiritual practice is, that it is any regular activity that is undertaken to develop spiritual growth and connection. So anything we do to try to feel more connected to our sense of self, to community, to something greater than ourselves, to enhance our spirituality. There's some on here that might be very familiar to you, like prayer and meditation. There's also some that are not always a spiritual practice, but can be if you bring spiritual intention to them. Like gardening is one that I've learned a lot about from my patients. People sharing how, gardening could just be a hobby, but when you're gardening and you feel connected to the earth and you feel like you are part of creating an environment, in an ecosystem, that can be a spiritual practice. There's a lot of connection that can happen there. Knitting and crocheting, I would say, are another one where it could just be a hobby. But if while you're knitting and crocheting, you are just really bringing a lot of focus and attention to that activity, if you, I don't know, there's a way that can really connect us to our sense of self or to something greater than ourselves. Or maybe, I work with a lot of folks who volunteers who create prayer shawls So while they're knitting and crocheting, they are putting compassion, loving kindness, and goodwill into their project, which they then donate to the hospital for patients. It's definitely a spiritual practice. Um, I think another thing I want to highlight about spiritual practices, we often think of them as being very solitary, but some of them can be very communal, right? Like singing in a group, going to a yoga class, walking with friends in nature. I've got on here talking with a spirit buddy. That's literally you find a friend who's also interested in spirituality, and you create a regular schedule where you check in on each other. And it could just be a question, how is your spirit today? Or it could be, what are you grateful for today? And you have a regular practice of being in relationship to that person, talking about your spirituality. So I'm curious, looking at this list, do you all see anything that you're interested in, anything that you do or that you'd like to do? And I would invite you to share those in the chat. Deep breathing exercises. I like that. Volunteering that involves movement and conversations. Yes, thank you so much for sharing that one. That's another one that is more social. I like that when you said conversations as well, like the relational aspect is important. Yeah. This one can be a little harder. I know when we were talking about barriers before, someone shared time. And I think because this is usually a regular practice, it can be a little bit hard. Someone asked, what do you mean by gratitude? So when I think about gratitude, a gratitude practice, so a lot of people do gratitude journaling. And I know for me, one is like I have a journal by my bed, and every night before I go to sleep, I try to write down 5 things I'm grateful for, and I try to be as specific as possible. So that could be a gratitude practice. People also, there are mindfulness exercises around gratitude where maybe throughout the day you're just noticing things you're grateful for. Someone else shared their practice is holding hands. I love that. Yeah. And I think, like I said before, as our mental health changes, as we change, as we grow and journey through life, we have different needs. So it's okay to maybe you have one for a while and you switch it up. Often, when we're going through a mental health crisis, that might be a time when it's helpful to think about trying something new or to really focus on doing one of these practices as regularly as possible. So I know, like, I'll share, like last spring, I was having kind of a hard time. I was feeling really stressed out about some things that were happening in my family, and I felt like it was impacting my mental health. I started running. I've never been a runner, but I just did this like loop around my neighborhood, and I did it, without music, just looking at what was around me, just moving my body, and it was really helpful. So again, especially when you're feeling like really overwhelmed or you're going through a mental health crisis, finding a practice that you can engage in can really help with regulating your emotions. It can help with coping. It can be your space to feel what you're feeling. So this is a quote that I like from a book by Pema Chodron, who is a Buddhist teacher. This is from her book, When Things Fall Apart, Heart Advice for Difficult Times. She writes, things falling apart is a kind of testing and also a kind of healing. We think that the point is to pass the test or to overcome the problem. But the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and they fall apart, then come together again and fall apart again. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for all of this to happen. Room for grief, for relief, for misery, for joy. I picked this quote because I wanted this to be a reminder that our spirituality is not this like magic pill that's going to make everything better. It's much more about really giving space to everything we're feeling and to living more fully and whole. I shared these exercises with you, the idea of reflecting on what you value, remembering where and how you can connect to something greater than yourself, and the idea of a spiritual practice as ways to invite you into that deeper part of yourself, especially in times when you're struggling with feelings of disconnection, or when you have that angry why, that angry existential why is this happening? When things fall apart, your spirituality is a place that you could try going. You may not always get the answer from your spirituality. I know that I often do not, but it can be a safe place to feel and to find connection again. Yeah, I had one more note here, which is just that we have many resources in the medical field now to support you in your mental health, and spirituality is one of them. Spirituality is about, as I said before, embracing the fullness of life. There will still be suffering, but just as your ancestors made their way through this life, so shall you. So, a few notes to pass along: the essentials of the spiritual life, of integrating your spirituality into your mental health care. Be curious, try something new, be curious about your spirituality and what's meaningful for you. I would say it's okay to change your mind. Just because someone told you that one spiritual truth is what you should, like, that you should believe a certain thing, or you should feel a certain thing, or practice a certain way. Find what's authentic for you, or you can change your mind and try something new, to find what feels true for you. Offer yourself compassion. So there's going to be times when you make mistakes in life. And I think that part of what our spirituality is often calling us to do is to be compassionate to ourselves and others, to be forgiving, to understand that what we're going through is hard, to listen to ourselves, to be loving to ourselves. It's not easy, and I would say it is an essential part of the spiritual journey, is learning how to be compassionate to ourselves through hardship. And don't do it alone. You don't have to go through this by yourself. You can ask for help, guidance, and somebody to accompany you along your way through your spiritual journey and through anything you're struggling with your mental health. I think, like I said before, because of the stigma about both spirituality and mental health, we often feel like those have to be solitary journeys. And I think there is greater recovery when we do it in community and in relationship. So who can support you? Who are these people who you can journey with? So if you are religious, or if you're a part of a spiritual community, that there are often leaders within those communities who are trained to sit with you and listen, who are trained to care for you. And it can feel a little intimidating to ask for their time, but it can also be hugely beneficial to schedule a meeting with a rabbi, a minister, let's see, like, really, whatever spiritual community you're a part of, whoever the leader is, you can ask to meet with them one-on-one for additional support. You can also talk to a therapist or a counselor, like I said earlier, with places like the Danielson Institute or McLean Hospital, or here at MGH. There are a lot more therapists and counselors who are being trained in spiritual and existential care. They're not the same as a chaplain. That's not their main focus. They're focused in a lot of mental health care and support, but they have the ability to listen to what you're thinking about related to your spiritual life and to support that aspect of who you are. You can also work with a spiritual director. So I have a website here, sdicompanions.org. That's a place where you can find spiritual directors to meet with online or in person. A spiritual director is someone who is specifically trained to listen and companion you on your spiritual journey. They are not a therapist, they're not a life coach. They're really there for spiritual support. And the care that you get from them is not dissimilar from the care you would get from a chaplain. But I think what's different is a spiritual director journeys with you sort of over a longer period of time. So people meet with spiritual directors over the course of years. You usually meet with your spiritual director about once a month. Um, and together you can work on spiritual practices. You can share what your existential and spiritual concerns are and work through those together. You can also meet with a friend if you have a friend who is supportive of this part of your life or who's also interested in spirituality. They can be great support for someone to talk to. And lastly, I do have a chaplain here listed, like myself. The one thing about chaplains is that we usually work with people in a more acute setting. So, for example, here at Mass General, our spiritual care department, our chaplains, we work with people while they're inpatient here, so like admitted to the hospital. And we really only work with them while they're in the hospital. It's not an outpatient service. And there are very few opportunities to work with a chaplain outpatient. But if you are in the hospital for any reason, or if you have a loved one who's in the hospital for any reason, you can ask for a spiritual care consult, and a chaplain can be there to listen to you, to provide spiritual counsel to you, and to engage in spiritual practices with you that will help you through whatever you're going through. I've got a couple of resources here that I'm trying to remember how this exactly works. You could take a screenshot of this, or you can message us afterwards and I can get this to you as well. But these are some great resources. I have MGH psychiatry here. I know many of the psychiatrists here and have worked with them, like I said, over 8 years, and they're a great resource. Very, like many of the people I've worked with are very supportive around the spiritual experience of patients. If you're having a mental health crisis and you are in the MGH system, I encourage you to reach out. I've also got McLean Hospital has created this amazing website, this page on their website, all about spirituality and mental health. It's where I got some of my sources for our time together today. And it's awesome. I mentioned the Albert and Jesse Danielson Institute at Boston University. This is the place where they are doing a lot of training with therapists and psychologists around integrating spirituality into therapeutic care for people struggling with mental health issues. They provide counseling for individuals, group therapy, as well as family therapy as well. This is a resource I thought was super cool. Local religious and non-religious spiritual communities. This was developed by Harvard Divinity School. And they actually have some really awesome non-religious spiritual communities. So they have communities where people do things like make art together or read poetry together. Super awesome. Yeah. And then again, the sdicompanions.org, which is where you can find a spiritual director to work with if that's something you're interested in. All right. So I wanted to close out today with a poem that I often use with my patients, a poem that I have found helpful to myself, especially in times like now when sometimes it's hard to feel hopeful, when so much in the world is dark and sad and scary. So this is Hope by Jennifer Pratt Walter. See how the winds have shaped her hands to hold hope. So tenuous it trembles like a hummingbird's heart. She gently carries hope to a nest in the midst of the maelstrom and tilts it into the bowl of tiny feathers and mosses. Hope is so hard to cut. She might need your help when it seeps through the cracks of her fingers. Place your hands like this around hers. Together it can be done. When it hatches, when the nest is no more, watch the wind pick up hope and lay it softly into the welcome of upraised palms. I love this poem because it describes hope as being tenuous and fragile, which I think it often can be. I also love how it reminds me that we need each other. I think of the image in this poem about hope seeping through the cracks of our hands. It reminds me of being at the beach and trying to hold sand in my hands or hold water, and just how the water and the sand will come through the cracks in my hands. But what I feel like this poem is saying, if you have someone else to put their hands around yours, it creates more of a seal, and you can hold more. You can hold more hope potentially together. I, wherever you are in your spiritual and mental health journeys, I hope that today was an invitation to share that part of yourself with someone else you trust. I hope that our time today reminded you that your struggles, whatever they are, do not diminish your worth, your lovability, or your ability and your capacity to have an impact on the world. We are all together in this unfolding human story. And I wish you all the very best with whatever you are facing today. Yeah, and I have a little time if anyone has any questions or reflections that you'd like to share in the chat.
Thank you, Erica.
Mhm.
While we wait to see if there are any reflections, questions in the chat, would you mind spending a moment to share for anyone who may be an employee at Mass General, what supportive resources, spiritual support is available for employees? Would it be through something like, do you partner with the Employee Assistance Program?
Mhm. Yeah, we do. I would also just say, like, we offer support to MGH employees. So you can reach out to us directly. Uh, we have a website, we have an email address, we have a phone number. We could get you all of that if you need it. And if you contact our department, we can find a way for a chaplain to meet with you one-on-one to support you. We unfortunately don't have as many groups or for staff right now, and we don't have as many services in our chapel. We have a Catholic Mass 4 times a week, and we have a meditation once a week that are open to employees and to patients and families as well. Um, but otherwise, we primarily offer one-on-one support to folks as needed.
Thank you.
Mhm.
While we wait to see if there are any final thoughts, I did enter in the chat the web address to the Blum Center website. If you're interested in viewing the recording or would like to share with anybody, feel free to visit our website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. I also included the Blum Center email, which is pflc@partners.org. It essentially stands for Patient Family Learning Center. So if you'd like a copy of the resources that Erica shared earlier on, feel free to email us and we can share that with you.
Mhm. Yes, so we have a couple different group meditations through MGH. The one that our department offers is on Wednesdays at 1:15 in the Healing Garden in Yawkey. So that's in the Cancer Center. It's a really awesome space. In the summertime, we sit outside for our meditation. In the wintertime, we're in this sort of this closed atrium that looks out on the garden. And that's Wednesdays at 1:15. And if anyone's interested, we can add you to the email list for that.
Given that it's in the Healing Garden within Cancer Center, is it open to anyone or do you have to be a patient with cancer or a family member?
My understanding, I mean, right now it's mostly staff who attend, but I think it's open to anyone. Yeah, we haven't really had any issues with people who weren't cancer patients coming. So, yeah.
I don't see anything in the chat, so I think it's okay to end a few minutes early.
Mhm.
Before we end today's session, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
Maybe we could just do a few more breaths together. So, as we transition to whatever we're going to do next, I invite you to take another deep breath in and out. Breathing in and out. And I wish you grace and compassion for wherever you are in your journey today. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.